Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Springs Mental Health Summit, a summit for parents, teachers, neighbors, and friends to talk about mental health in our community. For more information, go to springsummit.org. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations today. I'm excited about this podcast because it's something that I've found a lot of value in talking about. We are going to be talking about humility today, and specifically about humility versus self-deprecation and how the thoughts that we have about ourselves and the inner talking that we do has an effect on our bodies. Dr. Mayfield, as we go into this conversation, would you mind just defining for us or setting up a foundation for what the difference between humility and self-deprecation could be?
It's interesting. I think humility is something that we put out there in this kind of ethereal state of I'm going to be humble in the situation, or I'm going to be I don't want to use the same word in the same to describe it. So I'm going to be selfless, right? I'm going to be selfless. I'm going to put myself before somebody else. And we kind of get that, understand that's what humility is. And there's a lot of people that have been taking that to the nth degree, where they get walked all over. Then it becomes the storytelling that I don't matter, or I'm less than, because now that story or that pattern keeps happening, where in their mind and maybe in the genuineness of their heart, they want to be humble and they want to be selfless, but they don't set boundaries. They don't put up parameters of what that looks like, or they have a misinformation of what humility looks like. And now it becomes this almost cycle of negative storytelling that changes how they interact and operate in the world.
You made a correlation that I think between two things that I think are actually pretty distinct, of humility and selflessness. Do you see them as the same, or because I would say that I think they're pretty different?
I think maybe they're on the same spectrum.
I like that idea.
If you want to look at it that way, continuum, maybe the same continuum. But no, they are different, and I think therein lies the problem, especially in just our community in general, whether it be from a faith community and their discussion around humility and selflessness, or even just from a social impact, social justice, or even just hey, I want to be a good person in my world. We get those two confused. And so I think this is a good conversation that we're having today, because like I said, they can lead to spiraling out of control to a place of self-deprecation and of negative storytelling. So let's look at humility. So I think this idea of humility is understanding. This is my way of understanding it. So you tell me, I want to hear from you too. And I want our listeners to kind of wrestle with this too, because I think this is kind of this definition that it's not going to be a solid black and white definition. I think if you go to some of the religious texts and that kind of stuff, it might have a more of a solid foundation in a definition, but in its application, I think is where it really becomes situational. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm babbling right now, but for me, humility is this idea of I understanding who I am and my place in this world, and I'm choosing to consider my accomplishments, my efforts, everything that I've done, and I'm considering how that impacts you, and I'm going to react accordingly, and not in a way that is prideful or selfish, but is, okay, I might be this person. Let's say I might be well-known, or I might be accomplished, but that really doesn't matter when it comes to being in relationship with you, because who you are and who you've been created to be matters just as much in this relationship, if not more. And there's that interaction between how we treat each other. So if I came to you and said, look at me, look what I've done, you need to bow to my wishes, that's pride, that's conceitedness, that's non-humility. But if I come to you and say, hey man, let's get to know each other, and don't look at these things that I've done or behind me. I mean, that's just where I'm at. But how can I enter into a relationship with you? That's kind of how I understand it. What do you think?
There's a really beautiful metaphor that C.S. Lewis uses, and actually I like your definition too, because I think humility is so multifaceted, and so your perspective is different than mine on different sides of it that I'd never really thought about before. But C.S. Lewis has this metaphor that I really loved about an architect who builds towers. And he said that and I think it was C.S. Lewis, that the individual who builds the tower can be humble by acknowledging the accomplishment as if somebody else had done it. And it does two things to me. Is it reminds me that I should be celebrating the successes of others and doing that well, and that I should be celebrating my successes in the same way. So it's not, oh, look at my tower, it's so cool, it's the best tower in the world. It's real, I think, more specific than that. Look at this tower, look at this certain infrastructure, the doorways are really cool in this one, and I can say that same thing about anyone else. And
Right.
I think that what I learned reading that was that humility is really based out of a foundation of identity. You have to know who you are. You have to have a good ability to see yourself.
Well, here's an example, and I know I joke about this with you quite a bit, and I do it in jest, but it's not. The truth behind it is that your success to me is of utmost importance to me. Like, we've our story of getting to know each other has been from kind of this mentor relationship to coworker to friendship, and that's kind of all mixed in there,
jumbled all
together, right? Figuring that out. But as I think about your success, my hope and in my relationship with you is I want to make you the best person that you can be. And if that means that you far out succeed anything that I've ever done, awesome. And I'm going to celebrate that. I'm going to love that. And that's the goal. And it's not this, how did, we're like, wait a minute, now he's outshining me. And I'm like, no, that's not what that's all about at all. Yeah. It's about how do we, and the hope then is that you find somebody someday to reciprocate that too, right? But it's not this comparing, well, his tower is this tall and his tower is this tall, and why is mine this? Wait, what happened? I taught him everything I knew,
and that word that you just mentioned, comparing, I think is so detrimental to humility.
Absolutely. Oh, sure. I remember in my early years when I was doing some youth ministry stuff up in the mountains, it was like, oh, how big is your youth group, and how big is your youth group? Like, but it's that we drive, the success model of size. How many people are you drawing in?
How much money are you
How much money you're making, that kind of stuff. Defeats humility 10 times out of 10. Yeah. And it can sneak up on us.
Totally. And I think if the comparison can do two things. It can make us prideful, or it can cause us to fall into that self-deprecation where I have the smallest tower. Nobody cares about my tower. Nobody cares about the size of my youth group. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. I'm worthless.
Sure.
And it just spirals into this. And I think we can see self-deprecation getting further and further away from identity, where we start off saying, look at this tower. It's shorter than everyone else's, something that we've done, that we've created that's a little bit more objective. Like, sure, your tower can be smaller. That doesn't mean anything about its meaning. But then we spiral into, now I'm worthless. Right. And the connection is so thin in that.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up. And this is where I want to plug shamelessly the Springs Mental Health Summit that's coming up in Colorado Springs on November 3rd, 8 in the morning to 8 at night. You can go to springssummit.org if you're interested in the what's going on with that. But our keynote speaker is Dr. Caroline Leaf. And if you don't know who she is, I would really encourage our listeners to go check her out. I think it's drleaf.com is her website. She's a prolific author, cognitive neuroscientist, and she talks through this idea how our thinking actually changes our DNA. And so when we're talking about this idea of humility and selflessness versus kind of the spiraling out of control, self-deprecation. There's something that happens in our DNA expression, and she talks about this idea, of that that when we think a certain way, let's say think negatively, think in a self-deprecation, a lot of us, nobody tells us we're stupid growing up, but somehow we come to the conclusion that when we mess up, we're somehow stupid. Now, obviously, that's not everybody's story. Some people's stories that are listening, that they had parents tell them that they were stupid and they were worthless, right? And that still enhances that spiraling of out of control and the self-deprecation piece. But what she says in the book is that the thinking actually has the potential to unzip DNA expression through epigenetics. And so how our DNA expresses itself. So epi means over. So the kind of the over arching piece of the genes, and how it allows how the gene expresses itself versus what gets unzipped or unlocked and what doesn't, is largely due to our thoughts. And she makes some pretty and they feel like wild claims in her book, Switch on Your Brain, but as you look at the science of it all, it makes a lot of sense that I'm going to screw this up. It's around 90% of our thinking controls how we feel, react, interact, behave, and our health. 90%. And I might be off by five or six, percentage points on either side, but that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so for our listeners to go, let's take a step back, and how am I interacting and reacting with myself first? That identity piece. Is it a place of confident humility, or is it a place of self-deprecation? And I know for myself, I vacillate based on my own story and based on my own woundedness. I vacillate back and forth.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I'm more on the confident humility side, but let's be honest, that's takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really important concept of, if we have on one side the pride and just being haughty, and on the other side having the self-deprecation, humility is found somewhere in the middle a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And I think what I've found in my own life is it's really important for me to have people in my life that can call out either one. And sometimes it feels better to be called out on the self-deprecation, but not always. Sometimes that sucks. And a lot of the times it sucks to be called out on the pride and haughtiness. Sometimes it feels really encouraging. But having people around you who can call that out, because I mean, we've fallen into this trap either way, where our neural pathways are much stronger to think that way than humility. And so to have people in our lives like you who can come, who are able to come to me and say, hey, Trevor, he said something yesterday and it came across as really prideful. And then there's a check that I go back and I say, okay, what was the purpose in saying that? And I can kind of evaluate it and go back to more of a humble thing of like, oh, okay. And I think it takes humility to accept correction like that.
Well, it does, because if we don't have the humility to accept correction, we either go into this FU mentality,
Yep,
or we go into this F me mentality.
totally.
Right. So it's I'm going to, me against the world or me against myself.
Yeah.
And humility is this, okay, that stung. That didn't feel good. Right. There's some truth to that. Let's figure this out and go, okay, I'm going to take this piece of what he or she said, because that's true. But this one, they didn't really know me very well, so I'm not sure about that one. And right, you kind of tweak. And that's the teachableness piece that we talked about in earlier podcasts of how do we grow through teachableness. But it's all integrated into itself. And it's something that we don't learn unless we have people in our life that are willing to take that risk of I might hurt your feelings, but your growth is more important to me than your feelings in this moment. And I'm not going to do it in a evil, right, condescending way, or I shouldn't.
Hopefully you
hopefully
wouldn't.
Wouldn't.
Yeah.
But it's more of the who you are, your identity.
Yeah,
is more important to be developed in this.
Right. there's a business concept that I really like called the Jar Jar Binks concept.
Oh, well,
And
nice.
so if
Okay.
you've ever seen,
Wait a second. It's been almost. What episode are we in now? And we brought
decades since the original, like the 2000s Star Wars trilogy came
Dang.
out. And if you don't know anything about it, there was this character called Jar Jar Binks that came across as pretty racist and was really super annoying, and his popularity ratings were through the floor. George Lucas, who came up with this concept, had a couple ideas, and a couple of them could have gone really, really well if he had had the guts to stick with it. But he didn't because of all of the hate mail that he was getting about this character. But the business concept is that you always want to have somebody in your life who will be able to call you out on your Jar Jar Binks ideas. The ideas that really should not go further than just an idea. And George Lucas, this idea has it, didn't have that person. And so Jar Jar Binks came to be. And it was a total flop and really tarnished the concept. And so having the people in our lives who are able to say, you know what, that's a really bad idea. Or, hey, you know what? You're thinking in this kind of light and you're talking about yourself in this way that I don't think is the best. And I want to hear you talk more honestly about who you are than saying you're awful or saying that you're greater than you are.
What's the role of, it should be the role of a good parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you're guiding and growing your child, and let's say your child gets in trouble and you're disciplining, not punishing, right? Difference, disciplining, right. Discipleship, teaching. Punishment is, in my opinion, no point. But the discipline piece where you're coming alongside and walking through it, many of you that are parents are going to listen to this and go, what is your kid's typical reaction when they get in trouble and you're working on discipline? I'm so stupid. Why did I mess up? Right? And that's a reflection on how they see their identity in that moment. And so coming alongside and helping to speak humility and teachableness into that moment versus self-deprecation, and you also want to build that confidence. Yes, you messed up and you're human. Yeah. Doesn't mean you're stupid. You speak those words of life into building up that identity. As a human race, we err on self-deprecation.
Yep.
Right? Unless we've been severely wounded as a child or anything like that, then we might err on pride or narcissism. But for the most part, as a human race, we err on self-deprecation. And to have somebody in your life that you can counter that and speak those words of truth and identity over you is what helps foster that ability to be humble.
Yeah. There's a challenge that I've had to sit with and still am sitting with because it's hard. I want to kind of practice it with you, Dr. Mayfield, of having somebody encourage you and then saying that to yourself because it's so much harder.
Yep.
Because I can sit here and I can say, Mark, you are a phenomenal leader who has such an entrepreneurial heart, and you've started an incredibly powerful organization through Mayfield Counseling Centers that has impacted this community and hundreds of lives and will continue to. And you have cared for your staff in such a beautiful and wonderful way. And you are such an excellent father and husband, and you care for your family. And all of those things are true. Like I genuinely believe that all of those are true. And so that's something that you can hold as kind of a plumb line of like, sure. Okay, Trevor thinks this is true. There are other people that have confirmed that this is accurate information. Right. And then the challenge would be now you
right.
have to go home this afternoon, and before you go to bed, you have to say all those things as I statements.
Right.
And that is so difficult.
Oh man. I mean, as you're saying these things, I'm like, thank you. And I'm sitting there going, that's hard. I mean, how do I take that in a way that does, and I think there's the line, right? Of going, okay, I can take that from a humility standpoint, because I can't fight how he sees these things, even if I have a hard time believing those about myself. Right. But I need to go home and repeat those things as I statements to build up that confidence, so that I can, lead better or walk with humility. But hearing that, and we did this with Challenge Day at District 49 Vista Ridge last week with students, where we're talking about, go five things good about yourself,
Yep.
and you're sitting there going,
Yeah.
and it was really hard for the students to do too, which is indicative of this culture that we don't spend time really reflecting on who we are, or having people speak into us in that way. And I think that's a great example of how we instill the confident humility
Yep.
that needs to happen.
And the opposite may happen, where you feel really comfortable saying those things about yourself, and then you find yourself saying them to other people. That may be a sign that maybe you're erring on the side of the haughtiness.
Hey,
I'm this.
I'm pretty
good.
I'm
awesome.
You're right.
There's a level of, and I think the spectrum idea that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast is really beautiful, because I don't think there's any one spot that is the right spot.
Well, you and I have talked about this on numerous occasions throughout the last couple of years, of this idea that we live in tension, and life is just tension. This is kind of my existentialism coming out, but it's this idea that just being in this world and in life, there's certain tensions that we have to deal with. And so if we look at humility and pride, or self-deprecation and pride, as this tension, right, of this rubber band that's being stretched, and we got to find, the sweet spot on there. But even, we could take it going self-deprecation, humility, or humility and pride, these different tensions where if we pull too tight, the rubber band's going to snap. But if we don't pull enough, it's not going to be stretched. And so I think all of us go through this in our life, or should be going through this in our life, where we're like, man, I feel like I'm humble, but then people are telling me that I'm getting walked all over, and I'm not taking care of myself. To, you probably shouldn't have said that from stage. It sounded very prideful, or, and those kinds of things where but I mean, that's anything. We have tension in our marriages. We have tension in being parents. We have tension in our faith. We have tension in our work. And many of us are uncomfortable with tension, and so we run from it. And instead, embracing the tension and allowing it to teach us and help us grow.
Well, and I like talking about working out. If you go to the gym and you have no tension in your muscles, what's the point? Like, you're not going to get anywhere. There needs to be tension in your muscles engaging with the exercise that you're doing in order for any amount of growth to do. And if you're not sitting with that tension, if we continue with the metaphor of muscles, those muscles are going to atrophy. They're going to go away. And I think the same thing can happen in our life with these tensions. If we're not embracing the tension, or, pushing it and trying it and working with it, and finding a good taught level, which I could probably find some way to tie in taught with teaching, and you're being taught, and there's a pun there somewhere.
Yeah, just
tweet it at me.
Quit while you're there.
But I think that if we aren't able to sit with that, we aren't growing, and we will eventually find that we have lost a good amount of our ability to sit with that. And so it might be hard for some of our listeners to embrace that tension, because you've been experiencing so much slack and not engaging that tension in the way that you might have been able to. And so we want to encourage you, go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, start with something.
Well, and for those of you that are maybe been introduced to the podcast in season 2, we encourage you to go back and listen to season 1, because we talk about these types of things. How do you get people in your life that are safe in relationship and able to speak these truths? How do you stretch yourself in growth mindset versus fixed mindset? There's a lot of great resources in season 1 that can really can help you in these conversations. And one of the things that we're hoping to do here in season 2 is to provide some bonus episodes that go a little bit deeper from season 1. We've gotten some great feedback from our listeners that say, hey, this is great, but I need some more meat. And so we're gonna go back and look at that. And this might be one that we come back to and talk it more in depth. But my challenge for you today, as you listen, is who in your life do you have that can be that challenge for you, and who in your life are you challenging in a way that is life-giving and is in the place of humility, going, the interest of this person is beyond my own, because I know I have somebody in my life that's taking care of, and it's that reciprocal nature of care. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback. It might not be easy to hear, but it is definitely a great way to grow. And so thank you for listening today. And we look forward to this season as we grow in challenging you to be better human beings.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/candid conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.